The bag landed in the dirt with a dull thud. No ceremony. No hesitation. Just a flick of the wrist from a woman who had never once questioned her own judgment, and a sack of seeds tumbling end over end into the dust between the loading dock and the chain-link fence. Victoria Hale didn't look back. She was already halfway across the yard, heels clicking against the gravel path, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted people to move faster. Sharp. Clipped. Final. Dispose of the lot. She said to no one and everyone at once. The germination test came back below threshold. That entire shipment is a write-off. Around the bag, a dozen workers paused, looked, then looked away. No one bent down. The morning was already warm. This was late spring in the Central Valley of California, and the air smelled like irrigation water and turned earth the particular scent of a working farm trying to be something more than a farm. Agrinova Solutions occupied 400 acres east of Fresno. And it was not an ordinary operation. The greenhouses ran on sensors. The irrigation ran on algorithms. The seed selection ran on a proprietary scoring system developed by a team of agronomists who had never gotten their hands dirty in their lives, and who Victoria trusted completely. The bag in the dirt was proof of the system working. She stopped at the door to the main building and turned, scanning the yard with those pale gray eyes of hers. She was 41, with the posture of someone who had decided a long time ago that the world owed her nothing, and she owed it even less. Her hair was dark, pulled tight. Her jacket was the kind that cost more than most of her field workers made in a month. She saw the bag. She saw the handful of workers who had drifted closer, drawn by the quiet drama of a $4,000 seed shipment being discarded like kitchen waste. And she laughed, a short, dry sound, more dismissal than amusement. "Even my trash," she said, loud enough to carry, "has better value than those seeds right now." A few workers chuckled. One of the supervisors, a heavy-set man named Dale Fitch, shook his head with a grin. "Shame," he said. "Expensive compost." More laughter. Loose, easy laughter, the kind that forms when people need to be on the right side of the person holding their paychecks. Nobody noticed the man near the fence. He was standing apart from the main cluster of workers, at the edge of the yard where the shadow of the storage unit stretched long across the gravel. He was wearing a faded canvas jacket over a gray t-shirt, and his boots were the kind that had been resold at least twice. His name was Liam Carter. He was 34 years old, though he looked slightly older, the kind of older that comes not from age but from years of carrying weight without anyone to share it. He had been at Agrinova for 4 months, doing general labor, moving crates, loading trailers, cleaning equipment, whatever needed doing. He was quiet. He showed up early. He did not complain. And he did not make friends. And he ate his lunch alone at a picnic table near the East Gate every single day. Nobody thought much about Liam Carter. But Liam was thinking. He was watching the bag in the dirt, and something in his face had gone very still, not blank, but focused, the way a person looks when they recognize something that everyone else has walked past. When the crowd dispersed and the yard emptied, and Victoria Hale disappeared through her glass and steel door, Liam walked to the bag. He crouched down. He untied the top, reached in, and held a small handful of seeds in his palm. They were small, irregular, a mottled cream and gray color. Unremarkable. The kind of thing you could drop in a parking lot, and no one would stop to pick them up. He turned them over with one finger. Then he looked up, not at anyone in particular, just at the sky above the loading dock, at the pale California blue of it, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. He retied the bag, picked it up off the ground, and carried it to his truck. No one saw him, and if they had, they would not have cared. Liam had been an agronomist once, not a famous one. Not the kind who gets published in journals or invited to conferences or quoted in trade magazines. He had worked for a mid-sized agricultural research firm in the Sacramento Valley, a small operation called Meridian Seed Labs, doing field trials and genotype analysis on heritage crop varieties. He had liked the work in a way he couldn't fully articulate, the way some people like the smell of old books or the sound of rain on a roof. It felt essential, like he was attending to something that mattered. He had also been married once. He had a daughter named Cora, who was 9 years old, and who had her mother's nose and his grandmother's stubbornness. Her mother Rachel had left when Cora was 4, not because she was a bad person, but because the two of them had slowly become strangers to each other, and she had been honest enough to say so. Liam did not blame her. He had been absent in ways that had nothing to do with geography. The firm had folded during a bad year for venture funding. The owner, a man named Gerald, who wore the same cardigan every day, had sat Liam down in the break room and told him with genuine regret that the payroll could no longer support research staff. Liam had nodded, taken his severance, and driven home. That was 16 months ago. What followed was the ordinary quiet disaster of a man trying to stay above water. Unemployment checks, a smaller apartment, a school district that kept sending notices about Cora's lunch balance. He had applied for research positions at 3 companies. 2 had not responded. 1 had called him for a phone screen, been enthusiastic, and then gone silent. Agranova had posted a general labor opening. He had taken it. This was the context of his life when he carried that bag of seeds out of the gravel yard and drove 20 minutes east to the house a rental. 2 bedrooms, the kitchen window painted shut, where Cora was finishing her homework at the kitchen table. He set the bag on the counter. She looked up. "What's that?" "Seeds," he said. She looked at the bag for a moment. "From work?" "Sort of." She considered this with the particular economy of a 9-year-old who has learned that her father says important things sideways. Then she went back to her math worksheet. That night, after she was asleep, Liam spread a handful of the seeds on the kitchen table under the overhead light. He had not lost his eye for this kind of thing. The disqualification, he knew, had come from a standard germination test. Seeds placed in controlled conditions, tested for sprout rate over 7 days. The scoring system Victoria's team used was industry standard, calibrated for high-volume commercial varieties, the kind bred for predictability and consistency. What the scoring system was not calibrated for was dormancy phase variance. The seeds in his hand were not dead. They were not defective. They were a cold stratification variety, meaning they needed a period of low-temperature exposure before their germination switch would flip. Standard tests didn't account for this. Standard tests put them in a germination chamber at room temperature and marked them as failures when they didn't respond in a week. It was not ignorance on the part of the testing team. It was narrowness. The system had been built for one kind of seed, and it had met another kind. And it had simply rendered a verdict it was not equipped to render. Liam knew this because he had spent 3 years studying cold stratification varieties at Meridian. He had written an internal paper about this exact failure mode. Gerald had liked the paper. He had filed it away, and then the company had folded. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time, turning the seeds in his fingers. Then he got up, filled a glass jar with damp sand, pressed the seeds into it carefully, and put it in the back of the refrigerator. It would take 3 weeks of cold stratification before the seeds would be ready to germinate. He had a plan. It was not fully formed yet, but it was alive. 3 miles from the Agranova main facility, there was a parcel of land that had been part of the original farm purchase and had since been categorized as non-productive on the company's property map. It was roughly half an acre of clay-heavy soil, too alkaline and too compacted for the precision agriculture that Agranova practiced on its prime acreage. A broken irrigation line had flooded it 2 seasons back, leaving a silty crust over the surface. There was a rusted fence on 2 sides and a stand of scrubby cottonwoods on the third. Nobody went there. It had no cameras. It had no designation in the field management software. Liam had noticed it his 2nd week on the job, when a delivery route had taken him past the back corner of the property. He had gotten out of the truck to check a tire pressure warning and stood there for a moment, looking at the plot, the way he sometimes looked at things that other people had stopped seeing. He put in a quiet request, routed through the labor coordinator rather than any supervisor, to use the parcel for a personal gardening project during his off hours. The coordinator, a tired man named Phil, who handled 60 small administrative requests a week, had stamped it with a provisional personal use notation and forgotten about it. Nobody objected because nobody cared. After 3 weeks, Liam pulled the jar from the refrigerator. The seeds had swollen. Several had already cracked their seed coats, showing the pale tip of a nascent root. He began at 6 in the morning on a Saturday, when the light was still pink and the air had not yet turned hot. He worked alone. Cora was at her aunt's for the weekend, Rachel's sister, who lived nearby and who Cora adored. The ground was hard. He had no tiller. He loosened the soil with a spade and a garden fork, working in a slow grid, breaking up the compacted crust, turning it, breaking it again. He worked until his hands blistered and his lower back locked, and the sweat had soaked through the back of his shirt. He did not stop. He had brought what he could. A 50-pound bag of composted material he had purchased from a garden center and transported in the bed of his truck. Not enough. Not nearly enough. But something. He had also brought stakes and string. And by noon the plot was mapped into rows, rough rows, nothing like the laser-level precision of Agrinova's main fields, but rows. He planted carefully, spacing the seeds by hand, pressing each one into the amended soil at the correct depth, covering it, moving to the next. By 4 in the afternoon, every seed was in the ground. He sat on an overturned crate and drank from a water bottle and looked at what he had done. It looked like nothing. A scraped piece of earth with rows of disturbed soil and a few small stakes. He drove home, washed his hands at the kitchen sink, and made himself a sandwich. He ate it standing at the counter. Then he pulled out his old notebooks from Meridian, the ones in the cardboard box in the closet that he hadn't opened in over a year, and began to read. The following Monday, the labor crew had gathered near the main greenhouse for the morning briefing. Dale Fitch ran through assignments. At some point, another laborer, a young man named Travis, who had worked the farm for 2 seasons, glanced over at Liam with the particular expression of someone delivering a joke he'd heard once. "Hey Carter," Travis said. "Heard you took those dead seeds home. You planting them?" A few people looked over. Liam looked at Travis. "Yeah," he said. Travis laughed, not meanly, just in the reflexive way of someone who thinks something is obviously absurd. "Man, you're gonna harvest dirt." A couple of people chuckled. Liam did not argue. He did not explain. He turned back to the briefing sheet in his hand. He was used to this. It was the specific texture of being underestimated. Not dramatic, not hostile, just ambient. The low-grade noise of people who cannot see what you see, who assume what they cannot see, does not exist. He had decided early in his life that arguing against this was a waste of energy. The only answer that ever worked was the kind that didn't need words. He drove out to the plot after his shift that evening and checked moisture levels with a probe he had rigged from hardware store components. He adjusted the buried soaker line a second-hand length of irrigation tubing he had purchased from a salvage yard. He took notes in a small spiral notebook. Then he drove home. This was how it went. For weeks. Week 3, almost nothing had emerged. He stood at the edge of the plot in the early morning, looking at the rows, and counted 8 sprouts. 8 from several hundred seeds. The rest of the soil was still and smooth. He stood there for a long time. He was a careful man. He did not spiral easily, but there was something in the silence of that plot that pushed on him the particular weight of failure that arrives, not all at once but in increments, accumulating the way small debts do until the sum is impossible to look at directly. He sat on the crate and opened his notebook. He had done everything right. Cold stratification, correct duration, soil amendment, adequate given the constraints, moisture, consistent, planting depth, within specification. And yet, he pressed his fingers into the soil near one of the rows, feeling the temperature, the texture. Too compact still, even with the amendment. The clay beneath the top layer was still resisting. The question was whether the roots that had started growing could push through it, or whether they would curl against the resistance and give up. He drove home that night and did not speak much at dinner. "You look tired," Cora said. "I am." She ate her spaghetti for a moment. Then, "Is it the plants?" He looked at her. "How do you know about the plants?" "You talk about them sometimes," she said. When you're on the phone with Grandpa, you say stuff like the soil pH and stratification period. I looked those up. He didn't know what to say. Dad, she said, with the complete directness of a 9-year-old. Maybe they're just waiting for you. Maybe they're not dead. Maybe they're just still deciding. He looked at his daughter for a moment. Then he said, "You might be right." He went back the next morning with a soil aerator, a manual one, basically a long-handled fork with hollow tines that pulled plugs from the earth. He worked the rows for 3 hours, punching aeration channels every 6 inches, opening pathways through the clay for water and roots and air. His hands were bleeding by the end. He wrapped them and kept working. He changed the watering cycle, longer duration, lower pressure. He added a dilute calcium treatment to break down the alkalinity in the deeper subsoil. Small changes, specific changes, each one based on a hypothesis, each hypothesis drawn from the notebooks. He was not guessing. He was diagnosing, and then he waited. At the end of week 5, he arrived at the plot in the early morning to find the rows transformed. Not all of them, not even most of them, but a section, the center rows, the ones he had amended most heavily, the ones with the best aeration had erupted. The word that came to him was erupted, because that was what it looked like. A low green surge, dense and vital. The kind of growth you associated with rainforest floors, not with a neglected half-acre of alkaline clay in the Central Valley. He walked the rows slowly, crouching, looking. The stems were thick, unusually thick for this stage of development. The leaf nodes were close set, which in this variety indicated high photosynthetic efficiency. The color was a deep, saturated green, not the lighter, more uniform green of commercial crops, but something richer, older looking. He took measurements. He made notes. He cross-referenced the growth metrics against the data tables in his notebook. Then he sat back on his heels in the dirt and pressed his hands to his face. These were not ordinary plants. He had suspected as much when he first examined the seeds. The mottled cream and gray coloration, the irregular size distribution, these were the morphological signatures of a heterozygous line. A crossbreed that had not been stabilized, that carried trait variants that the Agrinova testing protocol would have flagged as inconsistency. Inconsistency was a commercial liability. You could not sell a crop to a wholesale buyer if you could not guarantee uniformity. But what the protocol did not account for was that some of that variance expressed itself as yield potential. These plants, if they continued at this growth rate, would produce at a level that exceeded the Agrinova standard varieties by a significant margin. He did not tell anyone. He watered the plants and went to work. The interference came from a direction he hadn't expected. Elliot Graves was a field supervisor at Agrinova, mid-level. Ambitious in the specific way of people who want authority without accountability. He had noticed, over the previous 2 weeks, that Liam's truck was parked near the back corner of the property on evenings and early mornings. He had eventually walked out to look. He stood at the fence line for a while, looking at the plants. Then he went back to the main building and pulled up the property map and found the provisional personal use notation that Phil had entered 4 months ago. He came to find Liam on a Tuesday. "Carter," he said, stopping beside the equipment shed where Liam was loading a pallet. "That land out back. You're using it." "I have authorization," Liam said. "Authorization from Phil," Elliot said. The tone made it clear what he thought of Phil's administrative authority. "It's non-productive land. I'm not interfering with any company operations." Elliot looked at him. Then, slowly, with the care of a man who is building a case, "That land falls under the company's agricultural permit. What you're growing on it, technically, is company property." Liam said nothing. "I'm going to need you to cease operations out there. I'll have someone clear the plot this week." That evening, Liam arrived at the plot to find the water supply line capped. Someone had also removed 2 of his stakes and left them in a pile near the fence. He looked at this for a long time. Then he drove to the hardware store and bought a 50-foot coil of garden hose and connected it to a spigot on a utility building at the edge of the property, an unrestricted tap, used for equipment washing, not covered by Elliot's informal embargo. The next morning he was there at 5:30, watering by hand. On Saturday, Cora came with him. She was small for her age, but she worked without being asked, moving between the rows with a smaller can, pouring carefully at the base of each plant, not spilling. She had braided her hair back and wore one of his old work shirts, rolled to the elbows. "These are good plants," she said. "They are. Why does the man want to get rid of them?" Liam thought about how to answer. "He doesn't know what they are yet," he said. "So they seem like a problem to him." She considered this. "That's his problem, not the plant's problem." "Yeah," he said. "That's right." He went home that night and typed up a 4-page technical summary: growth metrics, yield projections, agronomic analysis, and saved it to a USB drive. He did not send it to anyone. He simply wrote it down, the way he had always worked. Systematically. Precisely. Without drama. He was going to need it to be undeniable. Agronova had retained a consulting relationship with a woman named Dr. Margaret Hollis, who was a crop scientist at UC Davis and one of the recognized authorities on high-yield vegetable genetics in the western United States. She came to the facility roughly twice a year to review the varietal selection program and advise on trial designs. She arrived on a Thursday in late August, 3 months after the seeds had been thrown in the dirt. She was doing a routine walk of the facilities when she took a wrong turn near the back of the property, following a path she hadn't taken before, curious about a section of the map marked as non-productive, and stopped. She stood at the fence for a while. Then she took out her phone and photographed several of the plants. Then she called the main office. "Who is managing the plot in section G7? She asked whoever picked up. There was a pause. "Section G7 is non-productive land. There shouldn't be. There are crops growing there," Dr. Hollis said. "Impressive crops. Someone call Miss Hale." Victoria Hale walked out to the fence 20 minutes later with Elliot Graves 2 steps behind her. She stood beside Dr. Hollis and looked at the same rows she had never looked at in 4 months of them growing. Her expression was controlled, but Liam, who had been called from the equipment shed and was now standing at the edge of the group, could see the small displacement in her posture, the slight recalibration that happens when a person encounters something that does not fit their model of the world. "Whose operation is this?" she said. "Mine," Liam said. She turned and looked at him. It was the first time, in 4 months of him working on her property, that she had really looked at him. "Using what seeds?" Dr. Hollis asked. "The batch that was discarded in May," Liam said. "The lot that failed the germination test." A silence settled over the group. Elliot started to say something about permit authorizations. Victoria raised one hand, and he stopped. "Dr. Hollis," she said carefully, "what are your observations?" Dr. Hollis was still looking at the plants. "I'd want to run proper measurements," she said. "But visually, the node density, the leaf mass, the stem caliper, these are traits associated with high-yield lines. Significantly high yield." She paused. "If the growth rate holds through to maturity, I'd estimate this plot will produce at roughly 2 to 3 times the yield per square meter of your standard selection." Nobody said anything. Elliot looked at the plants. Victoria looked at Liam. Liam looked at the ground. "The harvest date?" Victoria asked. 4 weeks, Liam said. "Maybe 3. If the heat continues." She nodded once, the way she nodded when she was processing information that required recalibration. Then she said, "We'll revisit this at harvest." And she walked back toward the main building. Elliot stood for a moment, looking at Liam with an expression that had gone from hostile to uncertain. Then he walked away too. Dr. Hollis stayed. She looked at the plants for another minute. Then at Liam. "How did you know?" she said. "They're a cold stratification variety," he said. "The germination test doesn't account for that. They don't fail the test. They just don't respond to the conditions the test uses." "What's your background?" "I was at Meridian Seed Labs, agricultural research, 3 years. She nodded slowly. "Meridian. Gerald Abbott's place." "Yes. I knew Gerald," she said. "He had good people." She looked at the plants once more, then back at him. "You wrote the stratification paper, didn't you? The one about heterozygous cold dormant varieties." Something shifted in his face. "Yeah, I read that paper, she said. I read it twice. She held out her hand, and he shook it. Then, she walked away. He stood alone in the afternoon light, with his rows of plants and his notes and his sore hands, and for the first time in a very long time, something in his chest went quiet. They scheduled it for a Friday in September. The morning was cool, with a thin marine layer that had blown in overnight and hadn't burned off yet. The light was gray and diffuse, the kind of light that makes colors appear truer than they do in direct sun. By 7 o'clock, there were perhaps 30 people standing near the fence around Section G7. Field workers, supervisors. The entire Agranova research team. Victoria Hale, in her usual jacket, arms crossed, watching. Dr. Hollis with a clipboard and a team of 2 graduate students. Elliot Graves, standing at the back, saying nothing. They had set up a comparison. A parallel harvest of the same crop variety from Agranova's primary test plots. The standard issue, properly tested, professionally managed rows that represented the company's best current selection. Liam harvested his plot. It took 2 hours, working slowly, handling the plants carefully, weighing and recording each section of the plot on the portable scale they had brought out. When the numbers were compiled, Dr. Hollis read them aloud. The Agranova standard plot, yield per square meter, within normal parameters for the variety, consistent, reliable, exactly what the seed scoring system had predicted. Liam's plot, yield per square meter, 2.6 times higher. The number sat in the air. Nobody laughed, nobody spoke. One of the graduate students was staring at the scale as if it might spontaneously change its display. Victoria was looking at the rows of harvested plants, at the volume of them, at the weight of them, with an expression that was not quite shock. Because she was not a person who allowed herself shock, but it was the closest thing to it that her face could manage. Elliot had gone very still. Liam stood with his clipboard, waiting. How? Victoria said finally, not to anyone in particular. Just into the air. Did the germination test miss this? The test wasn't designed for this variety, Liam said. It's a cold stratification line. The dormancy response requires a specific temperature exposure window before germination will initiate. Standard tests run at room temperature for 7 days. This variety won't respond in those conditions, regardless of seed viability. He spoke evenly, not triumphantly. Just as a person stating facts. So the seeds were never defective, she said. They were never defective, he confirmed. Another silence, longer this time. Dr. Hollis was writing on her clipboard with the contained energy of a scientist who has just seen something that is going to make her rethink her current research priorities. The field workers at the edge of the group were looking at each other with a kind of wondering uncertainty, the expression of people who are watching something that they will be talking about for years. Victoria looked at Liam. She looked at him the way she had looked at the yield numbers. With the specific, focused attention of someone recalibrating from the beginning. Carter, she said. Ms. Hale. My office, she said. 1 hour. Then she walked away. Her office was on the 2nd floor of the main building, behind glass that looked out over the primary growing fields. It was a spare, functional room, a large desk, 2 chairs, a whiteboard, a shelf of binders. There was no art. There was no personal decoration of any kind. She was already seated when he came in. She gestured at the chair across from her, and he sat. Tell me about the seeds, she said. He told her. He went through the full explanation, cold stratification, dormancy variants, the limitations of the germination scoring protocol, the morphological signatures he had recognized, the steps he had taken to create viable growing conditions on the compacted soil, the amendments, the aeration strategy, the moisture adjustments. He put the USB drive on her desk. Yield projections, growth data, methodology, he said. It's all documented. She did not pick it up immediately. She was looking at him. You were an agronomist, she said. I was. Meridian Seed Labs. Yes. And before that, Cal Poly, plant science. Then a research fellowship at Davis. She was quiet for a moment. Why are you working labor here? He looked at the window. Company folded. Needed the work. You applied here? For the research positions. Twice. She absorbed this without visible reaction, but her eyes moved slightly back and forth, the way they did, he had noticed, when she was processing something unpleasant. We didn't call you back. No, because the system flagged you as overqualified. He said nothing. She leaned back in her chair. Outside the window, the fields ran in long, precise rows to the edge of the property. Her fields, her precision, her system. I threw those seeds away because I trusted a protocol that wasn't designed for that variety, she said. And you knew that. I suspected it. The morphology suggested it. You could have come to me. I was a general laborer, he said. I had no standing to walk into your office and tell you your testing protocol had a gap. She heard the truth in this. She was not a person who deflected truth when it arrived with enough weight behind it. There's something I should tell you, he said. Those seeds, that variety, I've been looking into the provenance. I think they came from a crossbreeding program that was running about 8 years ago at a research station in Oregon. The program was discontinued because the yield results were inconsistent in standard testing conditions. He paused. For the same reason my plot should have failed. The testing conditions were wrong for the variety. She was very still now. So there may be more of this variety somewhere, he said. In storage, in seed banks, cataloged as failed stock. Because no one ran the right test. Victoria Hale sat in her chair in her spare, precise office. And for a long moment, she was simply a person absorbing the weight of a very significant mistake. Not a small mistake. Not a careless one. A systematic one built into the infrastructure of how she had been running her operation, quietly discarding what it could not understand. How many other varieties, she said slowly, might be in the same category? I don't know, he said. That would take time to investigate. She looked at the USB drive on her desk. Then she looked at him. I need you to do something for me, she said. I need you to be honest with me, not diplomatic. All right. Is the problem fixable? He thought about it. Yes, the testing protocol needs amendment for non-standard dormancy responses. The scoring system needs a secondary classification for cold stratification candidates. It's not a small change. It would require retesting your current inventory and revising the rejection criteria, but it's entirely fixable. She nodded. Then, what would it take to keep you here? He met her eyes. A fair one, he said. She tilted her head slightly. Not a favor, he said. Not a gesture. A research position. A clear scope. The authority to recommend protocol changes without having to route them through 3 layers of management who will table them because they don't understand the implications. She was quiet. And a clause, he added, that any findings from the protocol review are attributed to the research record, not absorbed into the company IP without acknowledgement. She considered him for a long moment. You've thought about this, she said. I've had time, he said. For the first time in the conversation, something in her expression shifted toward a register that was not analysis or calculation. It was something quieter. Recognition, maybe. The specific recognition of a person looking at another person and seeing, clearly, where they had wronged them. Those applications you submitted, she said. I'm sorry. I know, he said. That's not adequate. No, he said. But it's a start. The deal they reached was not complicated. Liam Carter was reclassified as a senior research agronomist, effective immediately. He was given oversight of a new initiative, dormancy, phase variant research, with the mandate to audit the company's existing rejected seed inventory for misclassified dormancy, response varieties. Dr. Hollis agreed to serve as external advisor. He was given a proper laboratory space. He was given a budget. He was given 2 junior researchers who had been assigned to other projects and reassigned at his request. He was given, for the first time in 2 years, a title that matched what he actually knew. He was also given Section G7, legally, formally, as a designated research plot with resource access that included proper soil amendment equipment, a calibrated irrigation system, and a weather monitoring station. The first thing he did, after signing the paperwork, was go home. Cora was sitting at the kitchen table when he came in. She looked up from her book, a novel about a girl who discovers a wild horse, which she had been reading for 3 weeks and seemed unwilling to finish, as if she didn't want the story to end. He sat down across from her. "Something happened," she said. "Yeah." She waited. "I'm going to have a different job," he said. "At the same place. A better one. The kind I used to have." She thought about this. Because of the plants? Because of the plants. She closed the book around her finger to hold the page. "The ones that were just waiting," she said. "The ones that were just waiting," he said. She looked at him for a moment with that particular 9-year-old clarity. The kind that sees through most of the things adults spend energy maintaining, and then she nodded once, as if this was simply the correct outcome, as if the universe had finally caught up to something she had known for a while. "Good," she said, and opened her book again. He was at the plot the following Saturday at sunrise. The harvest had taken nearly everything, but there were still a few plants in the far corner of the plot, the ones he had held back, the ones he had allowed to go fully to seed. He moved between them carefully, collecting the dried seed heads into paper envelopes, labeling each one with a date and a row designation and a set of notes in his small, precise handwriting. The air was cool. The cottonwoods at the edge of the property were beginning to yellow at the tips. Somewhere out in the main fields, a tractor was running a low, distant mechanical sound that mixed with the early morning birds. Victoria Hale arrived at 7:15. She walked across the field in flat shoes. He noticed this, the absence of the usual heels, and stopped at the edge of the plot. She was holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She held one out to him. He took it. They stood at the edge of the plot for a while without speaking, looking at the rows in the morning light. The remaining plants stood upright, dry and brown at the edges now, having given everything they had. "I had a call yesterday," she said. "From the Oregon Research Station. The one you mentioned. They have approximately 4,000 pounds of seed stock from the discontinued crossbreeding program in cold storage. They've been considering disposal." He looked at her. "I told them we'd take it," she said. He nodded slowly. "At the right price," she added. "Of course," he said. She drank her coffee. The tractor sound grew and then faded. A crow landed on one of the fence posts and regarded them with the unimpressed gaze of a bird that has decided humans are mostly tedious. "Carter," she said. "Miss Hale, I misjudged you. I misjudged the seeds. And I built a system that made it easy to misjudge both. And then I trusted the system over my own observation." She paused. "I'm telling you this not because I need to confess something to feel better. I'm telling you because you're going to be running research for my company, and I think you should know that I understand where the failure was." He considered this. "The system isn't bad," he said. "It works well for what it was designed for. It just needs to be broader." She looked at him. "You're not going to let me flagellate myself?" "No." "All right," she said. Something in her expression eased slightly, not softened exactly, but made more room. "I'll take that." They stood there a while longer. The marine layer was burning off now, the gray giving way to blue at the edges of the sky. Across the field, in the main growing areas, the rows of crops ran straight and ordered and predictable, well managed, well tested. The product of years of careful protocol, and here, in a corner that nobody had wanted, in soil that had been written off, from seeds that had been thrown in the dirt by a woman who was too certain of her own system here, something had grown that the system had not accounted for. Not despite the adversity, not by luck or miracle, but because one man had looked at what everyone else had walked past, had recognized what they had not recognized, and had gone home and done the quiet, difficult, undramatic work of giving those seeds the conditions they needed to become what they already were. Liam finished his coffee and set the empty cup on the fence post. He pulled out his notebook and wrote the date at the top of a clean page. Then he walked back into the rows and began.